things. And this is a problem that's kind of come up with internet legislation before, or free speech on the internet legislation before. It's a generational thing. People who don't use these things don't really understand what's going on at all. I mean, that might be part of it.
No, at the same time, I mean, there are other people that were involved in the report. Ruth Wishart was there, and Neil Walker, Professor Neil Walker, and I'm sure he's very in touch with online communications. I think Andrew is absolutely right. It's patchy. And wholesale draconian. It doesn't really address the realities of any problems, if any, with the Scottish media. And I think that's absolutely right. That the problems that we've been talking about during the episode have largely come from Fleet Street, as Andrew said. So it's not, if we're looking for a Scottish-based solution, this is not Scottish-based because it's based on reports that were largely conducted on what happened elsewhere, and I don't see any reason that any such circumstance in Scotland should be posited as much more heavily policed than anywhere else.
Yeah, I do tend to agree with that, and I think just to back up what you were saying there, Natalie, it seems to me. Even if the octogenarian Lord McCluskey, who, as Natalie is saying, is an eminent man in several respects, even if he doesn't spend his weekends on Twitter, I find the sort of failure to engage in any serious-minded way with the sort of phenomenon of social media and citizen journalism, and it being a good thing, and not necessarily something which we need agents of the state to be peering over our shoulder at. I find that to be pretty indefensible and rather unaccountable. And it maybe speaks to the extent to which that panel really needed somebody on there with more pronounced experience of the realities of contemporary publishing, if I can put it that way.
As we all know, the Scottish media has always been a paragon of fairness and virtue, and there's never been any accusations of bias or hysteria ever. So nothing to see here. Let's move on.
Well, we can move on. We can move on to from Scotland to a corner of Scotland which may not be Scotland in future. Free Shetland. Time for the Oodle Law to break out and throw off the tyrannical shackles of Scots law and become independent. This is the story this weekend of Tavish Scott, who's suddenly become a Shetland nationalist. Apparently, Natalie, you were we squint at this. You have to explain what Tavish is up to.
Do you know, I actually think Tavish has been very, very clever. The Lib Dems are having a spectacularly bad time of it at the moment. Their conference seems to have been a bit of a damp squib. Apart from, the things on bedroom tax where they've soundly spanked their political leaders in London, there's not much interest coming out of it. So Tavish is constructed an argument in order to grab newspaper headlines. And he's done that. He's overshadowed Willie Rennie and put himself and Shetland on the map. And, it's quite extraordinary that, the Lib Dems are apparently in favour of home rule, but he's mooting self-determination for Shetland all of a sudden, whilst at the same time, conversely, not advocating the same for Scotland and suggesting that the Shetland, Orkney and Shetlanders are malcontent at being run from 400 miles away in Edinburgh. But at the same time, he would have previously been arguing that they were perfectly content to be run from London a further 500 miles away. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's completely unworkable. And I've not seen the Shetland Independence Party in the polls there, but that maybe there is an argument for it, more self-determination for them, or greater autonomy. I wouldn't put any kind of embargo on people's right to self-identify how they want to. So that's interesting, but that's just my initial thoughts on it.
What do you think, Michael? Would you, if you were a Shetlander or an Orcadian, declare independence?
Would it be dreadfully cynical to suggest that the last time the Shetland Independence Party made big inroads was 1979? There was a referendum going on around then, and then I believe that they sort of came back into prominence around 1997 when there was another referendum, and now there's another one coming up, and now they're kind of making inroads again. It's quite amazing how it goes in these cycles. Every time there's a referendum, the Shetland Independence Party seems to make an appearance, and then they just disappear after the referendum. But broadly, I would kind of agree with Natalie, where If those people want self-determination, then they should have it, absolutely. But the kind of thing that was in the Scotland on Sunday this morning, I think Wings Over Scotland put a good kind of slap down on it about, they said 70% of the oil waters would belong to Shetland. And they've actually took a bigger look at the laws and said, no, actually just the 12 miles around Shetland would belong to Shetland, if you actually look at the law of the thing. No, in general, I just think it's slightly unusual, the timing of when the Shetland Independence Party seems to make its appearances.
You're not suggesting there's anything cynical or agendized about their appearance, are you, Mike?
Never.
It's like, it's a partition is the way forward, I'm sure. I think it's interesting, though. I'm always interested in these little anomalous places. In the UK, we've got loads. If we think about, Jersey and Guernsey, the Channel Islands, and the Isle of Man, and all of these sort of little enclaves that have kind of particular rights. And I think it's interesting that it fits quite nicely in Britain's haphazard state, and you probably both saw that the Falklands this week decided to stay as an overseas territory of the United Kingdom to the tune of 99%, I think, in their referendum. But I don't know, I think it's interesting from a future constitutional planning point of view, if we're going to become independent after 2014, about, why would Orkney or Shetland have a right or would deserve recognition as somehow special, somehow a bit different from the Isles of, Rum, Egg and Muck, and or the kind of People's Front of Bute, or you know what I mean? I think it's quite interesting, these little eccentric constitutional oddities. And we must remember, the reference to Udal law that I made at the front, in Shetland, they do have a different, slightly legal system historically, which they've inherited from the Vikings. So maybe that's an argument for why an independent Scotland should treat Shetland and Orkney a wee bit differently from our other kind of island peripheries.
But you're in the People's Front of Bute, Splitter. I'm in the Butean People's Front.
I think they're forming now, both of them. Thanks, Colin. I think it's quite fun, though. I think it's quite fun, some of these things, because they make you think again a wee bit, albeit, I'm sure, for venal politics and sticking it to the Nats. I'm sure that's a significant part of this. But I think it's fun to kind of reevaluate how you think about your constitutional politics and to think about how a rather self-contained little place like Shetland can possibly make kind of big claims about its autonomy. I quite like that. It sort of appeals to me somehow.
Yeah, I think the thing about Shetland and Orkney is they probably do feel a little bit different because they are quite remote from the rest of mainland Scotland, mainland UK, and they do have a kind of Viking history, as you've said, which has kind of shaped their cultural identity a little bit different. So perhaps that's a factor. In not feeling maybe as Scottish as maybe they have been Scottish for however many months.
Sorry, I was just saying I've never actually been to Orkney or Shetland, which I suppose is, so I haven't really known terribly many folk from one or the other, so I don't know quite to what extent they sort of see their identities in terms of sort of like onions. They're foremost Shetlanders, and you peel back a layer, and then they're Scottish, and then peel back another, and they're maybe British or whatever, or Europeans or that kind of thing. I don't know, Michael, do you know any Shetlanders or Orcadian folk?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm just checking it up. I think that Shetland became part of Scotland in 1458. I think I might be wrong by a year or two. And actually then the Union 1707. So if time is any consideration, then that's not good news for the Shetland Independence Party, all three of them.
I think Plaid Cymru might disagree with you on that, yeah.
That's true.
Sorry, Natalie.
I do know Shetlanders. I went to university with a few, I think, at Aberdeen. But we strangely never got on to constitutional issues over a beer or three.
Oh dear,
I'm not quite sure what their opinion would be.
Oh well, there we are.
We have other more pressing matters to discuss, like which bar we were going to, I think.
Apologies for the all three of them remark. I'm sick. That's my excuse.
Exactly. You're a poor ill man racked with sickness. Oh well, we can just hope to say to the Shetlanders that we'd be better together. I'm sure that will convince them all. And also, it's very imperiling for better together in general. I wanted to ask both of you about this week that the Scottish Government lodged on Monday its referendum franchise bill, which will sort of govern who can vote in terms of the independence referendum in 2014. And I believe that's going to be followed up even next week by the referendum bill proper itself. But I was quite interested in this franchise topic, and there's kind of maybe three big issues here. There's one about 16 and 17-year-olds who will be able to vote after the creation of a young person's register. There's the issue of prisoners, and the SNP has decided that prisoners can't vote, won't be able to vote in this referendum. And then there's the kind of wider issue about folk out with Scotland, out with the local government register, will not be able to vote. So it puts pay to the hopes of those in London, those in Abu Dhabi, those in, you name it, who think they're Scottish and want to vote on this. Natalie, I wonder what you thought about those franchisee issues. Were you happy with the scope of who can vote in this?
By and large, yeah, I absolutely welcome 16 and 17-year-olds being allowed to vote. I think that it was done for the right reasons, and it has been a SNP policy for many years actually to bring 16 and 17-year-olds into the franchise. And this is kind of the first time that we have the power to really do so, or have been gifted the power to do so. And so, yeah, I welcome that. I don't think it's a cynical move by any stretch of the imagination, especially if you've been to any high schools and listened to some of the very vigorous debates in defence of the union. You know, I think they're much cannier than people give them credit for. So I welcome that. The issue about people in prisons voting is a difficult one because obviously the SNP government want to continue as is. I personally would not be averse to prisoners voting on this. I suppose that the difficulty is that, you know, you would have to change the franchise. Could you do it just for the referendum? But I think on something as substantial as this is going to affect prisoners when they are rehabilitated back on the streets, so to speak, in Scotland. So yeah, I think there is a persuasive argument for prisoners being given the vote. In regards to the kind of wider Scots abroad, I think that it's pretty unworkable to expect Scots abroad to be in a franchise, allowing them to vote. Because, I mean, where would you stop? What would be the qualifications if they've been away for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Are they citizens of other countries? You know, there are so many Scots that have moved away with no intention of coming back. I think it would be far too difficult to determine who was able to vote. And so, you know, I think we should just stick with a local government franchise on that one.
What do you think, just to pick up on the prisoner votes issue, Michael? I mean, I was blogging on that this week, and I think it's probably legal for them to deprive prisoners of the vote. But what do you think? Do you think it's a canny move? Is it a move to avoid controversy? Because it is quite controversial with the public, the idea that prisoners should be able to vote in anything. It's got quite a lot of opposition to that in general terms. Is that a canny move by the SNP, or is it, as one person put it to me this week, a dispiriting evidence of yet more conservatism from the Scottish National Party?
That's an interesting question. Just to say, I'm in favour of prisoners voting. I don't see why they shouldn't be able to. Prisoners are people like anyone else. However, it's a realpolitik consideration, to use that word again. Probably terrified of the soft on crime headline. It might just be as simple as that.
It could be. Also, I should say that the realpolitik explanation presupposes that the folk in the SNP leadership in particular are in favour of giving prisoners the vote. And actually, if you go back into the parliamentary record, you will find Alex Salmond saying very clearly he is not in favour of prisoners voting at all, which is, I think, an interesting proposition, particularly because the blanket ban on all prisoners voting, the reason why the European Court of Human Rights sort of said that was a problem was Article 3 of Protocol 1 of the European Convention, which an independent Scotland would be expecting to sign up to, which in fact the Scottish National Party is trumpeting to the high heavens that it is going to defend European human rights norms while a perfidious, evil, Eurosceptic, narrow Tory, southern, malicious band of villains will do away with your fundamental rights. The thing is, though, does that mean that an independent Scotland would form a sort of social union with the English Conservative government in order to defy the European Court of Human Rights and maintain a blanket ban on prisoners voting after independence? Because that seems to me to be the logic of Alex Salmond's position. And I must say, it doesn't seem to me immediately comfortable with the idea that he's a great principled human rights defender, while in fact, you know, maintaining a view which is arguably not altogether dissimilar to that advanced by Cameron, Grayling and May on this matter. I mean, Natalie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's it's a difficult one. I view Theresa May's